Good morning, everyone. John Havlicek here with another edition of Common Grounds, where we share some grounds and talk about the common grounds that unite us, the political issues of the day that we have in common, which I think are quite a bit more than the ones that divide us. And so today's episode is part 4 in my series on private school vouchers and these other privatization schemes, I guess, that we have in most states in our country right now. Okay. And we talked about how these work. We talked about the fallacy of the funding for these mechanisms. We talked about the myth of private school superiority. And today's episode is kind of where are we now and where are we being pushed? I don't say where are we headed because that makes it sound like the die has been cast. And it hasn't. And I think we are being pushed in a certain direction by really just a handful of people. Okay, and we just need to wake up and be aware of it and push back. All right. So just to tell you, I am not going to rant and rave about the destruction of our society and some post-apocalyptic future where we live in the ruins of civilization. Okay, not going to do that. I don't think that's the case. But this is, yet again, a transfer of wealth from the middle and lower classes to a very wealthy, very politically connected group of the 1% that is taking the resources from us, from you, from me, from the 99%, and then using that money against us. Okay? And I've got a really good example here, kind of a personal anecdote. Okay, we had a student a number of years ago from Brazil, nice young man, and he and I talked quite a bit about the differences between the U.S. education system as he's experiencing it and as I understand it, and the Brazilian system. And he was very open that the public education system in Brazil was just horrible. It was chronically underfunded. Any family that could scrape together even a few dollars sent their kids to private schools. And in his case, it was his parents, it was his aunts and uncles who didn't have their own kids, grandparents, family friends. If they didn't have kids, they were all pooling their money so that he could get a private school education and then, experience something like studying abroad for a year because that was such a boost for him. And then the expectation would be that when he was older, if he didn't have kids, or maybe before he had kids but was working, he would do that for some other family because the public schools are just horrible. And I'm just going to give you a little plug for a book here. There was a great Brazilian educator and I guess you'd say philosopher by the name of Paulo Freire. He died about 30 years ago, but he was, top tier thinker on these things. And he wrote a very, very good book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it's not really just for educators. Really, everybody should read it. But every person who goes into education, it should be required reading. And I don't want to give you, too many spoilers. I will say that my key takeaway was that education is the only true vehicle for social mobility, for social justice. And I'm not talking about the culture war issues. I'm talking about helping people escape generational poverty, systemic racism, really generational abject hopelessness. That education was the only way to do it. Okay, so that's Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. So anyway, back to where we are. This is a huge transfer of wealth from the 99% to the 1%, yet again. And I say yet again because we have a lot of these, right? We talked about the military, about how as much as 50% of the military budget is open for privatizing, for profitizing. Yeah. Think about all the infrastructure projects around the country, the highways, the communications, all these things. Now, they create well-paying jobs for us, the 99%. But they also create massive profits for the 1%, who then take those profits and use them to buy politicians to, reduce their own taxes and stuff like that, right? I think about healthcare and health insurance and things like that. And so these things have been heavily privatized and profitized. And really, public education is the last really large pool of money created by the 99% that still primarily benefits the 99%. And the 1% is doing everything they can to profitize it. And this is how they're doing it, whether we call them private school vouchers or educational savings accounts or opportunity scholarships, all these very nice sounding names. But they're just profitization is all they are. And so, I firmly believe, and I think most of you agree with me, no matter how you vote, right, that public education should remain public. Public dollars should be spent at the ground level, not at the top of some skyscraper, right? That public dollars should be spent in the classrooms, not the boardrooms. Yeah. And so, I think we have this in common, is what it amounts to. And so I know this is really, really like, wow, this is heavy and it sounds like it's hopeless, but it's not. Okay. No single person who's going to be watching this video or who knows me, no single person among us is powerful enough to turn this tide, right? But collectively, we, the 99%, are incredibly powerful and we can turn this around. We can. Okay. First, we need to educate ourselves. We need to focus on what's important and not get distracted by the daily noise, the nonsense. So you're watching this video, good first step. Okay. Second, we need to push legislation to bring daylight to all these privatization schemes, right? Sunlight's the best disinfectant and all that. That's what we need to do. Okay. Then we need to be very, very clear on both sides of the political spectrum that we expect public dollars to support public schools or we will vote for someone else. And then finally, we need to make public education a voting issue. We need to make it a higher priority than some of these culture war issues or these noise nonsense issues that I think people use to distract us. Okay? Because otherwise we head down this road like some of these other countries where you have kind of a permanent upper class and a permanent underclass. And the irony, I guess, is that we will have chosen it through, I guess, indifference. Okay. But again, we have the ability, you and I, we are sufficient. We need to choose it. We need to stay focused. We need to stay the course. And you know what? We got to start today. We got to start now. Okay. So have a good day at work and keep up the fight.